My question is why? Not why did you make a fifth Indiana Jones movie, but why did you make this fifth Indiana Jones movie? I'm just trying to imagine how this happened, so let's pretend I'm a studio executive. I have a 5-person writing team consisting of Jez Butterworth, John Henry Butterworth, David Koepp, and James Mangold, and I say to them, here is $300 million. I repeat, $300 million! To make the last Indiana Jones film starring Harrison Ford. Think of some really cool ideas we can build a movie around and get back to me. A few months later, the writing team comes up to me and says, hey, we have some cool ideas for how to use your $300 million budget! We're going to have Indiana Jones in his last $300 million budget movie ride a horse down a computer-generated New York City subway, do a computer-generated dive into a barely visible dark ocean, climb through a basic dark cave where they have to cross a 5-meter rope bridge, run on top of a computer-generated train in the dark, and have a chase scene on motorized tricycles in some generic desert city. And I would say, you took my $300 million budget and came up with this? Get out of my office. Obviously, this isn't how the writing process went, but still, it's a good visual that makes you wonder how it's even possible they came up with this movie. Honestly, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's not a goofy movie like Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge honestly wasn't that irritating of a supporting character. A lot of YouTubers I know have been giving her a hard time, but Shia LaBeouf's character in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was 10 times worse than she was. But just thinking about what could have been really frustrates me. The basic premise of the movie is Indiana Jones and his partner Basil Shaw steal from the Nazis a contraption which I'm going to call the Archimedes dial because I can't remember the technical name of it. This dial has the power to predict when and where there will be fissures in the time-space continuum, where a person can theoretically travel back in time. Fast forward to 1969, and the former head Nazi scientist, played by Mads Mikkelsen, and the daughter of Basil Shaw, played by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, all want to get the Archimedes dial and find the other half. Rumors are that this movie was a production nightmare. The YouTuber Doomcock has been chronicling all the rumors of what this film was going to be about, and I honestly believe a lot of it. One insane rumor was that Indiana Jones and Phoebe Waller-Bridge were going to travel back in time and meet young Indiana Jones, and they were going to team up. But then both old and young Indiana Jones would die, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge would take up his mantle and redo all of his adventures. Thankfully, that did not happen. However, if they had Indiana travel back in time and team up with his younger self, that could have been cool. I mean, yeah, it's been done before, but at least it would have been more interesting than this movie. I'm imagining the two of them meeting, and then young Indy says something like,
"If you're me from the future, then answer this question. What breed was our dog Alabama?"
And old Indy would say,
"The dog's name isn't Alabama, it's Indiana. Your answer to that question doesn't prove anything. Then why did you ask me the question in the first place, you fool?" "I didn't kill my wife." "They switched the dials of destiny so they could give you Provasic."
I love Harrison Ford. I have been reading and watching other reviews, and people have a lot to complain about. They complain they did a disservice to Indiana Jones by emasculating him and making him a tired, depressed, old has-been, and nobody wanted to see Indy like that. People will complain Phoebe Waller-Bridge was annoying, but for me, the main problem with the movie is that it is just so bland and boring and unimaginative. It has action, and Harrison Ford isn't asked to do anything too unrealistic for a man of his age, but most of the action set pieces take place at night and are mostly CGI with the exception of the motorized tricycle scene. And even in that instance, it's a lot of CGI car explosions and CGI bodies flying off the cars. The set design is just awful. We should have been transported to distant, exotic locations with beautiful vistas, creepy jungles, and ancient ruins. I can't stop thinking about how cool those set pieces were in the Temple of Doom with the giant Kali statue, the expansive rope bridge over the canyon, the mine shaft. All of it looked so cool. You will not be doing any oohing or awing in this one. If you saw the trailer, then you would know that there are scenes with a de-aged Harrison Ford. I did not like these scenes at all. Everyone has been saying how good it looks, but I thought it looked pretty ridiculous. I still don't understand why Disney insists on doing these extremely expensive, overly complicated computer-generated facial models and sticking them on the heads of actors like they did in Rogue One. There are hundreds of random YouTubers living in studio apartments with $500 desktop computers who do deepfakes online that look 10 times more convincing than all of Disney's millions of dollars. It also didn't feel like young Indiana Jones. It felt like old Indiana Jones with a young mask on his face. I'm no special effects expert, but what it looks like to me is that for this young Indy sequence, they got a younger stuntman to do the running scenes and anything physical, and then when he needed to talk, they had old Harrison Ford actually acting it out and speaking, and then they overlaid his face with the computer model. However, old Harrison Ford's facial expressions are not the same as they were when he was younger. So this young Indy still sounds like old Harrison Ford, and his face moves like old Harrison Ford, so it's really awkward to look at. Then with the younger stuntman, they barely bothered to animate any facial expressions, so when we see him running around the train with his CGI Harrison Ford head, he has this dead-eyed mannequin expression. I think the deepfake YouTube channels are going to have a field day remaking all of these scenes when the movie comes out on video. If I were making this movie, I would have leaned a lot more heavily into the horror aspect of Indiana Jones and less on the car chases and the punching and the dodging. I would be using Temple of Doom and the beginning and ending of Raiders of the Lost Ark as my inspiration. Temple of Doom and Raiders of the Lost Ark had a lot of scary stuff in it, and I think a lot of people forget that. We all accept that these are family movies, but if you go back and watch the first two films, we have dead bodies with spears sticking out of their foreheads. Guys are getting shredded by airplane propellers and blood is spraying on the windshield. Hearts are getting ripped out of people's chests. Indy is drinking blood from a chalice made from a rotting human skull. Faces are melting off and heads are shriveling up. We see pagan idols built by demon worshippers with severed fingers and ears nailed to them. Dudes are getting steamrolled by giant rock crushers, and there is absolutely nothing creepy or scary in this movie. The action should have focused a lot more on using Indy's mind to get out of booby traps and solving puzzles. We should have been, I already said this, but we should have been taken to exotic, creepy jungles, and I'm talking real jungles, not that CGI garbage from Crystal Skull. So is this movie better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? I would say yeah, but not by much. They both stink, but for different reasons. Crystal Skull is cartoonish, the CGI is terrible, the action is silly, but at least Harrison Ford was young enough to pull off a lot of the physical action. Dial of Destiny, on the other hand, is just bland, dull, and boring. Not to mention, you could not have picked a less interesting MacGuffin for our heroes to track down. Dial of Destiny is one of the worst movie titles I have heard in a long time. How did we go from Indy discovering the Ark of the Covenant, sacred stones touched by the Indian god Shiva herself, the Holy Grail, to Archimedes' little compass that points the location of time portals? Is there anything I liked about this movie? There are a few glimpses of that original Indiana Jones humor in it. There are tropes in each Indiana Jones film that the filmmakers for Dial of Destiny obviously paid attention to and tried to emulate. They have a little bit of that classic Indy humor, like Indy is carjacking a Nazi car and he punches out the driver and he's getting ready to drive off, but then 3 Nazi officers open the doors and then climb in and he has to go along and pretend to be a Nazi for a while. We also have a pretty funny bug scene. Every indie movie needs a gross scene involving some creepy crawlies. We also have the villains who end up being undone by their own hubris, like they finally get what they want, but then they discover that what they want turned out to be really deadly. But other than that, I didn't care for it. I don't recommend it. Whoever was ultimately responsible for this movie turning out the way it did should just be ashamed of themselves.